So we'll go ahead and begin. So thank you all for participating in this webinar tonight. This is organized by the New Hampshire Council of Churches. The council is made up of 9 diverse denominations of churches in the state of New Hampshire, comprising nearly 400 individual congregations. For those who want to learn more about the Council of Churches, you can visit our website, which is simply nhchurches.org. The webinar tonight is entitled Everything You Need to Know About Voting in 2020. And as we get started, I just want to make sure that you all know that does not mean this webinar is not intended to endorse candidates, policies, platforms on some sort of biblical or spiritual moral principle. There are plenty of those kinds of resources out there to find in your own religious or spiritual tradition. That's not what we're doing tonight. The webinar tonight is, however, intended to help you with a couple of things primarily. First of all, to help explain to you and members of your faith communities the mechanics of voting. How does registration work? Absentee balloting and mail-in balloting, which some of us are doing for the first time. What might be different about in-person voting during COVID? And second of all, we do have some programs that we'll introduce in a little bit that might be ways that you can talk to people in your faith community or just in your circles of relationships that you might be able to be helped in talking to other people about voting. So as we begin, I'd like to begin and open us with just a brief prayer as we do, and then I'll introduce our various speakers for this evening. So let us gather ourselves into a mind and a spirit for prayer. Good and gracious God, in ages past you endowed people like Joseph and Esther, Mordecai and Paul with position and influence to use their power for the good of their people and for the welfare of all their descendants. We ask that you enlighten us, teach us by your Spirit to see the position, the power, the influence that we enjoy through our right to vote, and so that we can use this gift as best we can for the good of all your people throughout the world. Amen. So this evening, we do have 3 people who will be addressing us. First up, we will be inviting Chris Potter with Granite State Organizing Project. Our second will be Brian Beihl, who you hear with Open Democracy, their deputy director, and he has a bunch of slides to really show us the meat of how voting will work. And Andrew Ahern, who's representing the organization Interfaith, Power and Light, who also has some programs and information about voting for us. So knowing our time restrictions, I'd love to turn things over to Chris right away.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for leading that prayer. I appreciated that. And I want to apologize, I can't stay the whole hour. The Manchester Aldermen are going to vote on establishing Indigenous Peoples Day in Manchester tonight. And so I'm going to be splitting my time and going to testify on that later this hour. Brian's got the real meat of the presentation, as Jason said. What I want to do is encourage you to use your influence as church leaders to spread this information. Once you get it from Brian, if you can put it in a church newsletter, put it in a church newsletter. If you can send it out to your person church or your outside the church, send it out. And I want to encourage you to include, when you send it out, this pledge card. People who sign pledge cards are 40% more likely to vote. And once people sign it, they have the option to receive some helpful reminders from my organization, Granite State Organizing Project. on deadlines and what they need to bring to the polls and so forth. So by any means, social media, churches, your friends, get the word out. And if you do find people who are really eager to be involved in this work of turning folks out, you contact me. And GSOP has a number of ways for people to be involved in the community, getting their peers to vote. So I'll turn it back over to Brian now to give you the real content here.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. And I echo Chris's ask to try and reach out to as many folks as you can to try and give a helping hand to people who might not be tuned into media, who might not be getting regular visits from people and might not know how to do all this. And so our organization is Open Democracy, and we've been working throughout the last few months trying to go into food pantries, go into senior living complexes, go into nursing homes to try and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to vote. And a lot of them for the first time are going to be using absentee ballots, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that, but we're also going to be talking about registering to vote and how to, what to expect when you vote in person, because there are, you can still go and vote in person just like you can, like you have in past years. But it is going to be different this year than it has been in the past. My name is Brian Beihl. I'm Deputy Director of Open Democracy, and we're Open Democracy, Open Democracy Action, and New Hampshire Rebellion. These are all groups that are under our umbrella. And we were founded by Granny D, Doris Granny D Haddock, who died at 100, but her big thing was walking across the United States for campaign finance reform. That was what she is known for, but what she is not as known for, but was really important to her, was getting people to vote. She wanted to get people involved in the process. And so we carry on that work. And when COVID happened, we kind of put the campaign finance stuff aside and really started to work, I wouldn't say exclusively, but mostly in the last several months on trying to get people to vote safely. So we've been spending a lot of time on absentee. So I'm going to share my presentation with you. And because we have a small group, before I do that, I just would like to just go around the room and I'd like to know what you're looking for out of this presentation. So can we start with Susan? And Susan, could you unmute and just tell us why you're here and what kind of information you're looking for? Because I want to make sure I can provide everything that you need.
Well, you may call me Sue.
Okay.
I've been through this pandemic remaining cautiously optimistic. And I'm 73 years old, but I don't look it. I hide it well. But I know that that's a demographic that's probably more at risk for the virus. So I'm spending an awful lot of time on Zoom getting my friendship visits in that way. But I'm not sure that I'm trusting the different ways of voting. I've always voted, and I've always voted in person, and I just want to know how that will be different. Basically, that's that.
I have a lot to share on that. And that's a really good question, because there's been a lot of rhetoric around it and not a whole lot of truth around it. So we have to get down between the rhetoric and the truth here. Yes. So I'll definitely be able to help you on that. So I'm going to go to Zachary next and find out what Zachary's looking for. Nice to have you here, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, well, in our parish, we've already, before the September primary, put out the kind of the instructions for absentee ballot and that kind of thing. So I'm just looking for more information for how to equip our parishioners to know how to handle the different environment with pandemics and voting and how that's working, and ways to encourage that, in a nonpartisan way, but trying to encourage people to vote.
Terrific. Excellent. And I've got some interesting things about do's and don'ts for faith leaders as well, because there's some things you can help your parishioners with and some things you can't. So we'll get to that in due course. Carol, could I ask you to unmute and share with us your story?
Well, I'm from Portsmouth, St. John's, and they recently put out in the local newspaper some very definitive voting instructions, which I was glad to see, and I've been forwarding them around to a lot of different people. But I wanted to see what else I could gather from this Zoom meeting and add to what I already know. And then also, I had been on an IPL Zoom meeting with Catherine Hayhoe and Susan Hendershot about a few weeks ago. And one of the things they really stressed, and they said, is that for ministers to do sermons on voting. And of course it would be non-political, but it's something that, and I feel strongly about that. I think that's really important, that, and this is just, and say how it affects economics and all kinds of things, and make it a value system of voting. And I just wanted to share that tonight too. I know somebody else is going to speak on IPL, which will be good.
It sounds great, and you're preaching to the choir in my case, in that we need to make that case as to why. One of our people just was at a food pantry a couple weeks ago handing out absentee ballot applications, and had a couple of encounters with people who didn't vote and who were, why should I vote? And sometimes for people in our business, that takes you by surprise, because we just live and breathe it. So good suggestions there. And thank you for coming again. So Dan, I'm going to go to you next. How are you?
Thank you. I am fine and happy to be here this evening. I am the leader of a tiny faith community in Dunbarton, St. John the Evangelist.
Mm-hmm.
And it is incumbent upon me as a duty, which I embrace, to be knowledgeable about how we participate. And I have, being a layperson, I talk about the ministry of lay people, and we are called to be active in the public sphere. And at a very minimum, that includes voting. So I need to be here to address questions, which I certainly think will come up in the next 4 weeks.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to know that we've got faith leaders, because that does, I'm going to share some things with you. This isn't the same presentation that I gave for our faith leader training a couple of weeks ago, but we'll be able to cover a lot of that. So, but just a reminder that this is nonpartisan. We're a nonpartisan group. It's non-denominational. We're going to say non-judge. I should have said non-judgmental. And we're all here to help here and be supportive, because, New Hampshire makes it very complicated to vote. We have a very complicated voter registration system here. There's, voter ID laws, and our absentee ballot process is very complicated. So I have been rather taken aback by the amount of stuff I didn't know about voting when this pandemic started. I'm an expert in campaign finance reform. There was a lot I didn't understand. And every time I do these, people say the same thing, like, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, you had to take those steps. So the big thing this year is the pandemic has made it even more, a more complicated system, even more complicated. So we went for about 3 months with very little way to register to vote in New Hampshire, because you couldn't do it by mail up until very recently. And all our clerk's offices were closed. And so now they finally have broken the log jam, and we're able now to register by they call it registering by absentee. But it is complicated. We're going to look at some of the documents that are involved in that. There are numerous steps to voting by absentee. So if you are concerned, we're working very hard on this for a couple of reasons. Absentee ballot voting is keeping people away from the polls, which is keeping people safe and our poll workers safe. So we're working very hard. But for a lot of people, this is the first time they've ever done it. And we're anticipating about 200,000 New Hampshire voters are going to vote by absentee, possibly higher. So it's a lot of people are seeing this stuff for the first time. Where and when you return your absentee has changed. So there are different rules for it this year. And per our question just a moment ago, can I trust the post office to deliver the ballot? And are absentee ballots different from a ballot that you cast if you vote in person on election night? So we're going to get to all of those questions. So you've already raised some of those already, which is wonderful. So registering to vote, you can do it in person. We recommend that you call your town or city clerk because some clerks' offices are still closed to the public, and you can only do things, in some cases, only do them by mail, but that's just a few places now. But for instance, the Nashua City Hall was closed because of a COVID outbreak there. And so you should call ahead, just make sure everything's okay, and they have specific hours, or perhaps you have to make an appointment. So you can register by mail, and I put this absentee ballot application up on the right there because in the first box, the second checkbox, it says I'm absent from the city where I'm domiciled and will be until the next election. I'm unable to vote in person, blah, 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 blah. And then it says, and request the forms necessary for absentee voter registration. So it's not obvious that that is actually saying to the clerk, I'm not registered. So I think there would have been a simpler way to go about saying that. But you can do that when you get your absentee ballot application, and they will send it through the mail. And most documents can be sent directly to them, either through the mail or electronically, to be able to do that. You can also register at the polls. New Hampshire is one of about 10 states in the country where you can register at the polls. But the problem is, this is a huge election. There's going to be a big turnout of people, and that means lines. And you're going to be in line with a whole lot of other people waiting to do their voter registration, and that's a very slow process. So we'd urge you that if you know people who are not registered, to try and get them to their town clerk before Election Day this year. Now, in other years, there's still going to be lines, but it's not going to be as dangerous. But this year, we have to be extra careful. So the requirements to register to vote in New Hampshire are you have to be 18 on or before Election Day. So you can be talking to 17-year-olds, provided they're going to be 18 before Election Day. You have to be a U.S. citizen, and you have to be domiciled in New Hampshire. And the simplest way to explain that is where you sleep most of your nights. Now, this gets really complicated when we have students that are, on our university and college campuses. And there are special rules that have been made for that, but you probably have heard that there have been some lawsuits along those lines. The two major lawsuits have been struck down by the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So we're back to where we were about 4 years ago, where most college students who are domiciled in their dorms or living in a town like Durham can register to vote by providing a driver's license. It doesn't even have to be a New Hampshire driver's license. It can be an out-of-state driver's license. And they have to be able to prove where they live. So you have to have, when you go to register, you have to have a proof of citizenship. And that normally means for most people a birth certificate. You can provide a U.S. passport, and I happen to have a U.S. passport card, one of the driver's license size ones. So I just registered. I just moved on September 1st. So I just had to re-register and go through all this. And I carry that passport card with me, but that's not something people would normally bring with them. But you can bring that in lieu of a birth certificate. Or, and because we have a big immigrant population here in New Hampshire, you can bring naturalization papers. And that will prove your citizenship in the US. You need some kind of government issued ID or a driver's license from any state. So you can get the voter cards, you could use a military ID, you can use a New Hampshire driver's license. And a note about, there's 2 notes about New Hampshire's driver's licenses. Unlike a lot of states, we have our addresses. Most of us have our addresses on our driver's license. If that driver's license has your current address on it, that is proof of domicile as well as being your driver's license. So keep that in mind. If you have moved, like I did, mine says Antrim, New Hampshire, and now I've moved to Alton Bay. And so that is no longer valid for me to be able to use as proof of domicile, but it's still my driver's license, still my ID. There's also the Real ID. Have you heard of the Real ID? So they started issuing this a couple of years ago, and you have to prove your citizenship to get that ID. But alas, the legislation has not caught up with the ID, and by New Hampshire law, you can't use the Real ID to prove either your citizenship or your domicile. So this is where I'm saying it gets into the weeds a little bit. So proof of domicile, what does that mean? So it can be rental contracts, it can be a utility bill with your name and the address of where you're domiciled. It can be a change of address forms. It can be a letter. Let's say I had to stay home from college and I'm living with mom and dad, and I can get a letter from them saying, I am living at home with mom and dad, and here you go, town clerk. You can use university records to show that you were enrolled at a particular university. So there's suffice it to say, there are a number of ways for you to prove the domicile. Now, that's if you have a house. We are all aware that this is really tough times for a whole lot of people with the pandemic. People are being evicted. Supposedly there is a moratorium, but I keep hearing stories about people being evicted. And we are expecting that there will be people who are moving in with friends, who are moving back home, or God forbid, out on the street. They can still register to vote by, in New Hampshire, there's a provision for, could be a church, any kind of service provider, as long as they could receive mail for you, they can register to vote and use your address, and they can say, my primary, where I spend most nights is under a bridge. Provided they have some kind of address. So hopefully those are the basics, but in the chat, I put a link to a very exhaustive PDF that says what documents can be used for voter registration. So I'm not saying you have to go and read that just right this second, but if a question comes up, your first, you can take a look at that document, but you can always send people to the town clerk or city clerk, or you can go to the Secretary of State's office and ask them. So as I said, voting in person, If you register and you want to vote in person, you're definitely going to want to wear a mask. You're going to expect long lines because this is a very important election. You're going to be socially distanced, which means that some of the voting booths, there are going to be fewer voting booths in some places. So it's going to back up the voting lines, unfortunately. Depends on the place and what kind of voting booths they use and a number of things, but just be aware that you have to be prepared here. We recommend that you bring your own sanitizer, although there should be some available for you, and a black pen that you are going to keep, you're going to use, and you're going to keep. There will be black pens that are being provided. We watched while town election officials grabbed a big pile of pens with their hands and stuck them in the jars, which kind of defeated the whole purpose of it. But hopefully they will, we just recommend you to bring some extra stuff along. There have been some polling places like in Derry and a couple of other towns where masks are optional. And so we are really highly suggesting you wear a mask, that you, if people that you come in contact with aren't able to do that, there will be masks available at the polling places for anyone who wants one. So you should know that. And there will be polls that have no mask rooms or tents. I think in most cases in November, it's going to be inside because of the cold. But if you have somebody who refuses to wear a mask, there are accommodations being made. It just won't be in the same room as the rest of the polls in most polling places. We're asking everybody to be really courteous to the election workers this year because they have had to put up with a whole lot, and they're taking a sizable risk by coming in contact with hundreds, if not thousands of voters. You need to bring your ID, and they may ask you to drop your mask, to hold up your ID and drop your mask. So you want to have that right at hand. And we talked about registration. There are some communities where polling places have changed, where the polling, like in some of the wards in the cities, the rooms were too small and they had to go to larger facilities. So it is best to be check before you go to vote to make sure of where your polling place is. So requesting an absentee ballot is an option, and as we discussed, there's a couple different ways you can get a hold of this. You can download one from either your town's website or from the Secretary of State's website. You can call or email your clerk's office, and by the way, these have to be printed out if you download them. This is not an electronic application. They have to be printed out. Some of us don't have printers. They don't have the ink for the printers. So the option is for you to call your clerk's office and they will send you a printed copy. Now, for you faith leaders in the group here, I would suggest you get a couple of these and have them available to hand to people who might need them. Anybody can do that. Whereas with voter registration materials, nobody can handle voter registration materials except the clerk and the Secretary of State and the voter. We can't get in the middle of that. However, on the absentee ballot applications, you can hand those out to anybody who wants one. So feel free to do that. And you can also stop into the clerk's office if you want a printed copy, and they do have stacks of them there. In some communities, they'll have them at the library and in the post office. Post office has been kind enough to put some of those out there. This is the most recent version of the absentee ballot application. So if you want to vote if you want to register, I already pointed that one out. If you are already registered, you're going to check that top box in section 1. And then down below, there is a new line that we helped to get there. That is, I am unable to vote in person due to concern for the novel coronavirus COVID-19. Now, the other reasons that you can vote by absentee is I'm going to be out of town, my work won't let me, religious observance, and disability. So a lot of our seniors use the disability checkbox for that. That is also what we're using. That's how they got the concern for COVID into the law for 2020, is they're using that disability thing. We just added a line to make it a little clearer to people. I say one form works for both elections. We only have one election left, so you don't need to worry about that. You also, for the primary, you don't need to check which ballot because there's only one ballot for the general election. And then you're going to fill out on the second page, you're going to flip it over and you're going to put your first name, last name, middle name, your domicile address. So that's not a PO box. Then your mailing address, if it's different than your domicile, and your phone number and your email address. So if there's a problem with any information, the clerks will contact you and they'll use this as an information source. They're going to keep this on file and they'll be able to get back to you. And then you need to sign it. And interestingly, you can't sign it in anything but ink. Don't use pencil, don't use marker. You need to sign it in a pen, a black pen. And you can't use electronic signatures, even though you can download these. And you've all seen the legal documents that you kind of sign with in the PDF forms. You can't do that in New Hampshire, at least not yet. If you, and this is an important one, so this other blank down below, the signature line, if you help somebody as a faith leader, if you help somebody fill out this form, you have to acknowledge that you helped them out. There's going to be another place that we're going to talk about that you have to do this too. And it's perfectly fine for you to assist somebody. You just need to let the election workers know that you helped. For the blind, for people who can't write very well, there's any number of reasons. We are urging people to do this as quickly as possible. Our time is running out for absentee ballots, and you should be requesting those absentee ballots right now. So in the next 2 weeks, you can still go in, you can still request these by mail, download them, send them in. After the third week of October, all bets are off, and it's going to be you and the clerk handing stuff back and forth as opposed to mailing things. So we'll talk more about that too. So the absentee ballot package, this is a brand new one. I just got this picture this morning. This is what the typical absentee ballot package looks like. It has the ballot. It has a set of instructions. And this is a particular set of instructions that talks about how they bent the rules for COVID to be able to vote by absentee. We have the outer return envelope and the inner affidavit envelope with all the writing on it. We're going to take a closer look at that in a minute. And then there's this yellow sticky tag on there. And you can say that we're responsible for that too, because there was this scary language on there. And this sticky tag says the Secretary of State and the Attorney General say it's okay for you to say that you're disabled for the purposes of voting in 2020. That's what that's about. The absentee ballots are arriving all over the state. I do know some people who've been waiting for about a week and a half, but they are, if your application is in, they are arriving around the state right now. So you can expect to see yours shortly if you haven't received it already. So this is the scary affidavit envelope. On the left side is if you're absent from town, and that's kind of traditionally, that and physical disability are the most frequently used. But for this year, the religious observance, physical disability, or COVID concerns is on the right side. And the only reason that you're going to do the bottom of this is if you helped somebody per the absentee ballot application. So this is actually an envelope, and your ballot is going to go inside this envelope. So it has, it'll all be sealed in there. And when it gets to election night, actually a couple days before election, they're going to slit the outer envelope open. They're going to double check who you are, make sure you're on the voter rolls and you're all legal. And then they're going to put that aside until election night. And they will open this ballot just like they open the other ballots. So they do it all at once, but the ballot is exactly the same for absentee ballots as it is for voting in person. Exactly the same. They're going to run them through the same machine. So all of that is exactly the same. There's a couple more steps to the processing of this, but for anybody who's got concerns about whether my vote's going to count, is it different, can it be trusted? It's exactly the same process. And in New Hampshire, we have a large volume of absentee ballots, and there have been some scary things that have been said about vote by mail states where there's millions of ballots. But in New Hampshire, once we start counting ballots, we got to finish it. So whether, 24 hours, if it takes 24 hours, people will work for 24 hours to get all those counted. They don't take a break, come back the next day. They will do that contiguously until it's done and we have a count. So our guess is 24 to 48 hours, we're probably going to have a statewide count for New Hampshire. So not to worry about that. Our poll workers, and man, when this is over, you better buy your poll workers a cup of coffee or a drink or something, because they're gonna deserve it. All right, so once you got your ballot and you put it in the box, make sure you sign it. Remember, you can send it by mail, provided you get it in the next couple of weeks. But we're saying if you get it, I'd like you to sit down, fill it out, and send it back right away, because that helps the Postal Service and it helps the clerks. You can hand it to a clerk in town hall. You can put it in a drop box only if there's somebody standing there, because they're supposed to be checking your ID. And before 5 p.m. on election day, you can walk into the polls. That's only for this year. You can walk into the polls and hand them your ballot. If you are disabled, there are some rules here that you need to follow, and this is important for faith leaders. You can't return somebody else's ballot. So even if you're a pastor or a lay leader or some sort of role in the church, you can't return somebody else's ballot to the polls. You can bring it to the mailbox. You could bring it to the post office, but you can't bring it to the polls on election day or to the town clerk's office. However, a spouse, parent, sibling, all of those that are listed there, those are all okay for taking grandma's ballot to town hall. They have to be kind of directly related. All right, and nursing care facilities, there are special rules that apply to them as well, and nursing administrators are pretty on top of that. So I really wouldn't worry too much about that. Most of the nursing homes that we talked to have been on top of getting them taken care of. Can I trust the USPS? Yes, you can trust the USPS up to the last few days before the election. We are very concerned about that last week because things have been definitely taking longer. So we would say up to 7 to 10 days before the election. At that point, you should start bringing things directly to the clerk's office. The post office, the post office has been told that every piece of mail, including ballots, has to go through the sorting centers in Manchester and White River Junction, which is slowing things down. For a while, they were hand canceling absentee ballots, and they put the kibosh on that. So we talked about the absentee ballots being counted. And what can you do to make sure your vote counts? Well, one of the things you can do is you can go out to the Secretary of State site and make sure that they have logged yours in. And there's a special place for that, on the Secretary of State site. And this link is in your chat. You can go out and you can put in what town you're in, what your name is, and your date of birth. And if you submitted your absentee ballot, it will tell you when it was received, what's been done to it, and make you feel better that they're working on it. If you're not there and you know that you've sent yours in, then you need to call the clerk's office. They might just be behind in putting the data in. So that might be the problem, but we'll see. Worth a call. They don't mind talking to you. I know they're busy, but they don't mind talking to voters. And on the last days, if you want to vote absentee, your only option really is to walk in, and we're calling it instant absentee. So if you're registered, you go in, you fill out the application, you hand it back to the clerk. Clerk hands you back a ballot, you vote, you hand it back to the clerk, and you're done. And we were talking about Portsmouth at the beginning. Portsmouth is doing an excellent job with this. They set up an area in their council chambers for people to do this. Perfect. And as we said, you can bring them up to into the polls up until 5 p.m. And just a reminder that if you haven't registered and you're trying to do it at the polls and you don't have the documents, let's say your birth certificate is out in California and you don't have access to that for a couple of weeks, you can sign what's called a citizenship affidavit, and you can also do a domicile affidavit. And that says, I swear that I'm telling you the truth. There's some penalties for not telling the truth, but they won't keep you from voting. This will allow people to vote if they don't have the documentation at the time. So lastly, if you have questions, it is important for, you can ask the town clerk, the city clerk, you can call the Secretary of State's hotline, or you can go to the Secretary of State's website and you can call me. I'm happy to answer any of your questions because I get questions all the time and happy to answer them. So that's kind of it. I can take some questions and then I have to boogie over to another meeting with a congressman. So are there any questions that any of you have? I was going to say I'm not that good.
Yes, you are.
How would we know if our polling place has been moved?
Call the town, call the city.
Okay.
That would be the easiest way. Their town website will probably have it posted. I would guess there would be news about it because they would have had to have done this a month ago or more, because they have to do it a certain number of days before the election. But your town or city will probably have that pretty prominently on their website.
Okay. Thank
Good
you.
question, though. Good question.
That seemed pretty straightforward to me as far as the information. I'll just have to figure out kind of filtering it to something that is manageable for the congregation to receive and that kind of thing. But that's a breadth to work with. So thank you.
Sure, absolutely. And it is, I wouldn't hesitate to ask the clerk if you wanted to talk to the congregation. Ask the clerk for a stack of absentee ballot applications and have them available right at church if they wanted to do that. That way they've got both the option to be able to register to vote and to actually just fill out their absentee applications.
I think one of the logistics of church these days with the pandemic is that we're kind of a hybrid community with an outdoor service,
true,
Zoom, and so it's kind of unconventional this year in church as well. But I think there's a way to adapt this that it works. Absolutely. So thank you.
Great. All right. I know Andrew has some things to say. My email is I will put the email in the chat. I guess I didn't do that. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I'm happy to get back to you at another time as well.
Thank you, Brian. That was really great. Thank you. That was so helpful. All right.
Absolutely.
We'll let you go be with the congressman now.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good to meet you all.
So Andrew, we have Interfaith Power and Light. Andrew is with them, and I think Carol particularly was wanting to hear from him. So why don't you go ahead and take it away, Andrew?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'll be pretty quick. I'll just sort of give people an overview of IPL and how they can get involved beyond just helping people register to vote. So my name's Andrew. I am New Hampshire Interfaith Power and Light's Faith, Climate, Justice Voter Campaign Manager. Interfaith Power and Light is a national nonprofit mobilizing a religious response to the climate crisis. With over 40 chapters across the country, IPL has been organizing and activating people of faith throughout the country since 2000. NHIPL was founded just over a year ago and is the newest chapter of the 40. For the past 4 months, since I've been hired on with NHIPL, we, along with other chapters across the country, have been involved in our 2020 election effort, which we call the Faith, Climate, Justice Voter Campaign. And this consists of mostly swing states, so North Carolina, Wisconsin, and some others that are pretty important to the election this year. Our campaign consists of engaging individuals and congregations with our campaign materials, our public programs, and volunteer opportunities. People can get engaged with our materials by visiting our website, faithclimatejusticevote.org, or NHIPL, which I'll put in the chat later, where you can take our Faith Climate Voter Pledge and pledge that you're going to vote with climate and creation this year. You can download our Faith Values Voter Guide, which is a comprehensive guide about voting with your values across issues, not just climate change. And we have sermon resources and some other things that will help you and your congregations get prepared for this election. And one thing that we have available for people is opportunities as well. The most immediate way to get involved and actually really make a difference in this election year is to help us with our text banking that we're starting next week and the following weeks up until November 3rd. Our target demographic are low propensity voters who are people of faith and who are also very alarmed about climate change. We have a list of 8,000 people living in New Hampshire through our partnership with the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, and we'll be using a digital tool called ThroughText to send text to this list of 8,000 about engaging with our campaign and how climate change is specifically impacting their vote this year. I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them, but otherwise, if there's anything that I said that people are interested in, I'll put my email and some links and people can get involved that way as well. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Andrew. All right, well, thank you all for the participation tonight. I was grateful for what Chris and Andrew and Brian all brought to us. So I do have, I'll send a follow-up email to everyone who participated and even those who registered but didn't dial in tonight. That will, like we said, we put a lot of links in the chat. So we'll make sure that those chat links get back to you in your email. And I'll add a link as well, just to make sure that that the slides, I do have access to the slides that Brian had here. So that is something that we can share with you so you can review them again later on. Thank you all for doing this. Like I said, we did record the program this evening, so we will be placing this on YouTube and making it available for members of faith communities. So if this is something you want to later pass on to your own congregations or to local interfaith councils and things like that, this is something that we can spread around over the next few weeks and make available to those who could not be here tonight.
Thank you so much, Jason, for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's glad to have you all here. So thank you very much. Thank you, Zach. Good to see you, Sue.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you. Nice seeing you.
so good night to Carol.
Good night,
All right,
Tim.
thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
All right, be well.
Okay, thank you.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.